Cool. Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm very delighted today to have our distinguished guest speaker for the AI seminar today, Dr. Homa Hosseinmardi, Assistant Professor of Data Science and Computational Communication at UCLA. So she also Director of the UCLA OASIS Lab. Dr. Hosseinmardi is dedicated to taking a holistic and large-scale approach to understanding the integrity and safety of our online AI systems. Her insightful research has been featured in major media outlets and published in over 30 peer-reviewed papers, including prestigious venues like PNAS and Science Advances. So today, Dr. Hosseinmardi will address a critical methodological gap in how we analyze online harm, specifically examining the balance between what algorithms recommend and what users generally intend to consume. So very relevant to what Philip presented last week. So yeah, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Hosseinmardi.
Okay, great. It's great to meet you all. And just maybe many of you know, I've been here sitting as a student a few years ago, and it's great to be back here. So today I will talk about the study around understanding the harm of algorithm, specifically recommendation algorithm. I'm getting to the point of like what is happening when we are over studying algorithm and to some extent overlooking the agency of human. So just a little bit about my background. I have been studying online trust and safety, and then mostly like human-centered AI, meaning like if we add human in the context with the algorithm, how would harm would actually cause in the interaction of human and algorithm. We're solely just looking at one, we cannot get to what would be the harm that is coming from this interaction. So, and then to get here, mostly I have been working on developing incremental approaches to developing models to better answer this question. So my modeling approach has been multimodal, detection, prediction, or finding hidden patterns in the data. And as because it's like a lot of interaction, a lot of time. So most recently, I have been looking at auditing information ecosystem, auditing socio-technical system, and having cross-platform studies to better understand like what would be different if you just solely zoom into one platform compared to if you just follow one user across multiple platforms. What else or what is extra that we are learning, or what is it that we are missing? And perhaps I don't need to just spend a lot of time for the intro as like, okay, we have all heard this headline, heard about YouTube is radicalizing everybody, or like social media is hurting our democracy. But at the same time, what is worrying is just if we actually rely on anecdotes and examples and start generalizing that something that has happened to one or two people is actually happening to everybody. So basically, in a platform at a scale with billions of users, examples of any behavior is actually, you can find it. So we cannot rely to generalize from these examples. And worse, what we have seen is that first we start hearing that something is happening, and next, without actually rigorously studying how these things are happening, what is the scale of this problem, we ignore and jump into trying to oversimplify causes. Something we observe like 10 million viewership for an ISIS video, and then we jump into the conclusion that it should be the platform, it should be the algorithm, and then we start oversimplifying causes and jumping into thinking about proposing solutions. So basically, if I want to tell you in one slide what is my research, is that over the time my research get a lot of insight on journalistic report, but what we are saying is that instead of hasty jump into policy reform or thinking that like what is the cause of the problem, we first need to look at the scale of the problem. First, let's see how big is the problem, and then based on that, our approach may be different into how to attack the problem. Is we find that like systematically a large portion of users have been pushed toward one side of like political partisanship. That's a different story compared to there's a small group, but still because it may cause like severe harm in the offline space, then we have a different approach. So it's about that when you understand the scale of the problem, your approach would be different. And again, after understanding quantitatively what is happening, is it happening at a scale systematically or not, then we start thinking about what is the cause of the problem. Because we'll just get into the examples that easily by looking at the evidence and patterns, you would think that it should be the platform, something really bad is happening and it's the fault of the platform. And then it would come to providing insight for policymaker, which is more data-driven. So basically having representative large scale and holistic view, rigorously, like massaging the data until getting to the point as how things are happening. And today, we tremendous amount of data out there, right? We don't have any problem with actually just creating the data at a scale and trying to understand the patterns. But what is the problem is that things actually has become more and more complicated as we are living in the as we are looking into the platform through, or basically we are looking at the society through the lens of the platform. But what we are seeing is actually an algorithmically infused society, because everything that we are seeing is a combination of users and their interests and also the algorithm. So if you observe some behavior through the platform, the question for you would be, is it that actually I'm seeing what people like, or is it actually what I am seeing is what algorithms are presenting to users? And this algorithmically infused society has made it more complicated to get into the conclusions as what is happening. So for today, I will present one study which try to have kind of like end-to-end pass as like, okay, we observe some problem, we learn about this from like this journalistic report, and then we want to understand, is it actually something which has been continued after this report? The next report are the cause of the problem. So we want to see if we actually look at the data, what is it the same conclusion as if we continue after understanding the scale, then we try to understand better what is the cause, what would be the conclusion. And what got my attention for this specific study, which understanding radicalization on YouTube, was the story of this young gentleman who would say, I was on the online space watching YouTube, and over the time, I actually received more and more radical content. And then even though I want to get away from it, but there was like, like a flow of recommended content to me, which actually keep me in the rabbit hole of watching this content. And at the time, the question for me would be that, like, okay, is this example actually happening to a lot of people, 1, 2, 10, thousands of people? But before anybody is starting to, like what is happening, next we see, okay, it should be like some gateways. It's actually radicalizing everybody. It's the greatest radicalizer of the whole generations. So it comes as like you see these hasty conclusions of the problem. And so when I looked at the literature at the time, what I found was basically there is some conflicting conclusions. As some of the research study would say, you know what, it's actually radicalizing, but they were solely looking at the platform. So I guess perhaps many of you are familiar with API. So let's say that you just search something through API and then you just get something back as like a algorithm is a black box. You ask something and then you receive some recommendation. So this is purely looking at the behavior of the algorithm. So you cannot conclude with this behavior, actually, the whole radicalization is happening in the interaction between human and algorithm. Some studies have been looking at the commenting trajectory, and then it goes back to the ideas that we are hearing, oh, like there are some users, some specific influencer that they are acting as gateways, where basically they have been following the trajectory of people who would leave comments. And, like not everybody leaves comment, who knows who are the people, is the same distribution as the viewers, and so many questions. Perhaps these are highly engaged users that have a different characteristic. And the other problem was when they are actually showing that people start from moderate, then they go to the right, and then they go to the far right, and introducing right as the gateway, they didn't look at the other way. They didn't actually look how many people have been watching far right, then they moved to right, and then they moved to the center. Which would be, if you look, that would be interesting to see like which one is a heavier flow of users toward more extreme or moderate content. And the other problem was like many of the studies had the real sample, whereas a very small sample. So if you notice, these behaviors in general are rare behaviors. So if you take like 1,000 random sample or even like a stratified sample, it's very hard to conclude from the behavior of like 200 samples if anybody, like if anything actually robustly is happening. So here, we actually found this data set which has the browsing trajectory of the real users. So what are the characteristics of this data which help us to answer this question better? First, it has more than 300,000 users, which would be for this behavior, so like some harmful behavior, which are usually like coming from a small group. We had a large enough sample. It was representative sample of US population, desktop users. And it would span 4 years of data. We could actually longitudinally, both at the user level and population level, study what is happening. And we end up with about like 21 million YouTube videos. The other interesting characteristic of our data is that it has like the whole browsing trajectory of users in the panel, something from 6 months to 2 years, but across everything. It's not just YouTube. So when we are studying YouTube, at the same time, we have access to like all the browsing trajectories of users. And then for the rest of the talk, I will walk you through 2 projects. One is, okay, first let's try to understand what is the scale of the problem and then how people find this content. And then we see from the insight that we gain from purely quantitative study, what we can do about the next step as understanding why this is happening. Okay, so just a little bit of intro of like, what do we do with the data? So basically, imagine that like you want to bring people to the lab and ask them to sit on their device and just watch YouTube and then simulate the story that you heard from like this journalistic report. You come your laptop, start watching YouTube, you watch 10 videos and then you leave. So we want to extract some similar sessions from this long trajectory of users. So what we did was we said, okay, if somebody was near contact, if they were watching YouTube, and then something in the middle, we just cut whenever this gap is bigger than a threshold. So then we will have a small pieces of viewership as like these are the proxy for like somebody just using YouTube and then leaving the platform. So this would be our definition of session. Any questions?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So what if that session that you cut off is something that they saw on YouTube and inspired them to search something relevant?
Sorry, Wes.
So if they were watching something on YouTube, right? Joe Rogan said something, and they actually want to read more about it, so they go off of YouTube and start browsing that and come back to YouTube.
Yes.
So how do you account for that? Is that within a certain delta?
We will look at that one as well. So that we call is that like referral. Somebody may actually jump into YouTube after watching something or reading something on New York Times, Reddit, Twitter, something like that.
Mhm.
And that's exactly something that this data will help to answer us. Okay, I think I dropped some slide to make it a little, like I can put more of like result. But here, I should also mention that here the behavior that we are studying is consumption of news across the political spectrum, meaning like from far left to far right. So then we will take every single video, we check what is the channel that produced those videos. And let's say like Fox News, then we'll just label that every video from Fox News is labeled as left, as right. And then again, like everything from MSNBC is labeled as left. So it's a source level approach, meaning like whatever the channel is producing, all the videos from that channel will have this label. And then we have a group anti-woke, which basically we label them something between right and far right. But because these producers are actually human, it's not like New York Times, like you go like Joe Rogan and people like that, they are actually human. So they actually contacted us and said, we don't belong to left, right, or center. So we take them out and then we call them anti-woke. Okay, so first let's see that like how many users fall into the clusters of heavy consumer or like food.
Just a little bit of clarification. By woke, you mean like this is in the past, right? So it was woke left.
Yes.
Okay, because now there's like woke right, but I think it's a relatively new phenomenon.
I don't know much. I hardly understand like how these groups call themselves. These are the groups that
obviously need to spend 10 hours on social media like I do.
I think these are people who are anti-institutes. And then we will just get like this group of people, like by looking at what is the taste of their audience, then you can better understand like if this group actually presenting right or left. So that would just give us some insight about this group of people.
Sorry, I have a question about the labeling, about the channels.
Mhm.
How did you do it, or?
Oh, yes. Yeah, sorry, I hid that slide. Maybe if you, I will explain, and then, but if you want, I can show you more slide. So it's like, this is kind of like the study is a little old, you know, like 4 years ago is pretty much old. So at the time, like everything was channel level or source level, meaning that like you just get a channel and then you assign a label. And then what we did at the time was we could find like these previous studies that I was mentioning, each of them have like collected like 200, 300 channels. And then they just manually went through like 10% of the videos. And based on that, they assigned a label to that channel. And there were like 3 studies. Some of them had like 600, 300, 400. And then we put all of this together and then we could create a bigger data set of about 1,000 channels with these labels. And like sometimes they had different labels, so we could just use it as, you know, like, okay, they don't agree, so let's just take a look at these to agree. So it kind of helped, but we try to have this crowdsourcing from previous research studies. And then simply we had a user, and then for each user, we looked at the portion of consumption from each of these channels, right? So per month, we say, okay, for this user, you spend like 10% of your time on left, 10% on right, 10% on anti-woke, and you know, like right and far right. And then from there, we just simply tried like a different clustering approaches. And then we could assign each user to like a different, like to one cluster.
I'm sorry, just to clarify one last time, you're saying anti-work, right?
Anti-woke.
Anti-woke?
Yes.
Okay.
I think at the time they were called
Politically correct, for example, like, right?
they were like
No.
in intellectual dark web. They were called something like that. But I think the people who fall there are like tourism and
Like free press, right? Like the people who were criticizing the social justice people for going too far.
I think so. They are, I think the definition is they are against mainstream and institutes and left, anti-woke.
Was it difficult to draw a line between anti-woke and extreme right or far right? Because sometimes I imagine they may overlap quite substantially.
I can take some examples for you to give you like the name of these influencer, maybe that help. So we actually released the names in the appendix, and again, that caused another headache and impact.
Nobody
So,
contacted us. Sure.
yes, they were very sensitive about like how we group them. And they would fall between like alt-right and alt-right, like some group between right and far right. And we just put them there, and then they say, okay, no, I'm like Sam Harris. Like that was like one of the, you know, like influencer there. And but they just said, yeah, we are different.
Okay.
But the point is, for us, like having the viewers, looking at who are the viewers of these people, help us to better understand what they are producing.
Hey, I listen to Sam Harris. I'm not anti-woke.
I think they change, like these labels change over the time. And I would say at the time that they would prefer to be the separate group like that. Yeah. And then we just try to say, okay, maybe you're center, left, or right, but let's just put them into one group. Yeah.
But does your approach depend on kind of the relative position of these groups with respect to the left and right, or it's not sensitive to that?
We try some sensitivity analysis. So for everything, we just say, okay, let's just put these people who are fuzzy a little bit here, a little bit there, and then we could just see that it actually doesn't change the result. Like maybe this group was a little more clear. Far right, it was a little more clear. But yeah, I think the worst part was just grouping this group together.
So the colors are by activity, or
Sorry?
The colors represent activity clusters or?
Oh, no, like the colors are like,
Oh, sorry, I didn't
actually, like, yes.
see that. Oh, my
This
bad.
is like far left, left,
Yeah.
center, and I work right hand.
Sorry, I didn't see. My bad.
And this is based on the users, not on the channels. Or
This one is saying like, this is the percentage of users who actually receive the majority of their consumptions from this specific label.
Oh, I
So
see.
we create a vector with like dimension 6, and then for each dimension, we have what is the fraction of consumption of a user from this channel. And then we just try like unsupervised clustering, and then the best number of clusters that we find was actually 6. And then when we look at these, like the pattern of consumption within each cluster, what we found was like that there's a majority of the consumption within each cluster belongs to one of these groups. Meaning like that for the center group, like more than 80% of the consumption of average user within this group will come from center. So it's kind of like has this unimodal consumption within each group.
It's hard to see. The far left is, where is the
This
far
is
left?
far left. Yeah, so here
Oh.
we didn't have much. It was, I can mainly say it's because we didn't have enough label for far left. So they wouldn't be, and then for the rest of the results, you may notice that we just dropped them because there wasn't enough sample, so we can perform the same statistical analysis for far left. So if far left is not there, it's just because we didn't have enough sample for far left.
And another question I have is that are they supposed to sum up to 100%?
No.
No, okay.
This is like the percent of like American users.
So how do you explain the rise in left?
Explaining which.
Like, why does left go up, keep going up?
Oh,
Well, and I guess center
yeah.
too.
There has been other studies that they claim that YouTube is actually more left-wingish compared to right, but and then it's just for this observation period, but at least in this observation period, we had more viewers for left.
Wait, sorry, why don't they sum up to 1?
Because that's just like just percentage of Americans who are getting the majority of their content from the denominator is the whole American. The denominator is not reaching this group of users that we have.
There were some people that wouldn't fall in either of these.
Yes, yeah, there are like non-news consumers. Yeah, we have that as well. And then basically, yeah, the majority of people don't get news on YouTube because YouTube is mainly, but these numbers will add up to like a few millions, but the majority of YouTube users are getting entertainment content.
So to clarify, the summation of this plot would indicate that like around like 1% for 2% of the users consuming news from the YouTube.
Yes.
The nationally representative sample that you got.
Yeah, that's pretty much like very small. Like I think maybe news in terms of like production size is about like maybe 8%. At the time when I was looking at it, so it's like the production of news on YouTube is relatively small compared to like everything else on YouTube. And then these are like consumers from like 1,000 channels, right? So like you should just imagine how small this is compared to like right now in our recent study, we made it like 20,000 channels, and with 20,000 channels, it just goes into 10%.
I see.
Yeah.
Are there any differences in demographic between these two groups? Is it?
We have demographic, but unfortunately we haven't looked at it. So in our recent study, we looked at demographics, but we took like about like 60,000 channels. It start like it shrink, and then over 20,000 channels, which they will produce news or news-like information. Meaning like that, if you have a channel and then you just take like ABC News and post it yourself, they would call that also news. So that approach was by looking at the content, not looking at the channels. So when we tried that, then we looked at the demographic as well. And what we found was like the younger generation heavily rely on getting their news from what we call as news-like, because the producers are just, like influencers, like content producer, individual content producer, not organization. And then what we could see is that in that sense, younger generation, they don't go to hard news or traditional news sources. Okay, so here what we are seeing is that the majority of the users within our set actually are getting their news from left, and then it's center, and then the right. And then this is anti-woke, and this one is far right. Far left is just a small, you can just ignore it. And then within each group, we just looked at like how much time they spend watching per month news from these channels. Okay. And then the idea was like, okay, this is telling me that like, okay, like it's a small number of users, they fall into far right, but how engaged are they? This one does not tell anything about that. So within each cluster, we looked at like what is the median watch time for users of that cluster. What we find is basically an opposite pattern. So here you can see that for far right and anti-woke, consumers are way more engaged. Consumers of this specific category, and then they are almost twice, and then they are growing really fast within this observation period.
Sorry, I don't mean to keep.
No, please.
So would it be the case that right-leaning videos are longer, and do you account for that? Or because they talk a lot sometimes.
I'm sure that, yeah, we have that, we looked at that, and then the duration of the video we could collect it, and then definitely that's like the duration is longer for part. But I don't think that for this study it matters. It's just the point like that you watch more. We are not talking about is it because of the supply of production or is it because of the algorithm? We just say aggregated level, you watch more. But that's a good point. That's the point that we want to make. It's just because there's more of that content there. And
This is per session, right?
no, this is per month.
Per month. What?
Yes,
Only?
like within this month, these many people are getting the majority of their content in this month.
No. Median watch time, minutes.
That's per month. Yeah.
Not very much then.
No. Everything, like if you just put it at the scale of like, okay, per month, like we have like 10 minutes of consumption from these 1,000 channels. Yes. And I think again, just I emphasize that this is just all limited to the channels under study. This definitely would be bigger. Yeah.
Did you compare that to the general trend?
Like a random sample of videos?
Yeah.
No, I think we could do that because YouTube videos have a channel label, which is like, no, a video label, which says this is news or not, which is assigned by the user. So that would just tell us like, what is the average? Yeah, but yeah, we haven't. But basically because this is the biggest group and then even within our set, so it would be more like, maybe like close to left, maybe left is a better representative in terms of average within this 1,000 channels. Okay, so since there's a small group, far right, and the consumers are, or like the users of this community are heavily engaged. Now we come back to the question of, okay, is this because of the recommendation algorithm? Meaning that like, if you watch 4 videos from far right, then recommendation algorithm will tell you, you know what, you like it, watch more and more. So this is observational data, right? So we just go through our users and then we just create 2 groups of control and treatment. For these 2 groups, they have similar history. So we match on their history. History means like inside the platform and outside the platform, we just match over the fraction of news they get from each of these far left to far right group on web and on YouTube. And then we just split these 2 groups to control and treatment based on at a specific time point. Some of them have watched just 1 video, some of them have watched a few back-to-back videos. And then this is trying to simulate as like, okay, this is exactly what I want to get at. I want to say that there were 2 people, they had the same consumption history, and then one of them watched 1 video, one of them watched 4 videos from far right. And then in future, I want to see which one of them is watching more and more far right videos. So kind of like, this is like a difference approach. And then we just measure, okay, post exposure, what has happened, like which one is watching more far right or less far right videos. And then what we find is that, again, for anti-woke and far right, we will see that like compared to left, center, and right for these two groups, as users are exposed to 4 back-to-back videos, they consume more in future compared to their history. So this is something different from the result that like over the time. So how does it relate with this one? You know? Okay, how is this result complementing this one? Is basically here, we don't know if this is the same user who is watching more and more here or not, right? So we don't know that like, is it true that for one user, they are consuming more over the time, but this result will help us understand, okay, the same user, if he's exposed to back-to-back videos or has watched back-to-back videos in future, actually will consume more. So at the user level, also we find that signal that these are heavy consumers and over the time they are consuming more. So then it comes to the conclusion that like, by looking at the data, do we have enough evidence that YouTube is actually radicalizing?
So regardless of what people's individual preferences are, if they consume mostly left content, if you show them 4 right-wing videos, you will radicalize them?
Also, when we match on the history, right? We don't know like what is their history.
Oh,
We
I
just
see.
say-
So you're only comparing like big conditioned on identity, ideology.
Yes, at the time. So like 2 user left, center, or right, we don't know. We just say that
I
they
see,
had the
okay.
same history, and then one of them is watching 1, the other one is watching 4 videos
Okay.
from far right, and then in future, the treatment group is actually watching more compared to the.
And another question, just with does it only work toward to extremize people, or can you expose them to center, for example? With
Yeah, that's actually this is for
Yeah,
each
yeah,
group,
okay.
yes. So for here is like that people who are exposed to left, people who are exposed to center. So the point is that this behavior of like getting more and more engaged is again more pronounced for far right and anti-woke. So for center people is, you know, like the difference in future is half much like.
But the videos have to be congruent with your ideology, or can you be incongruent?
No, it can be like your history can be anything. It's not, so it's, the fact is like that, when we match 2 users, it doesn't say that the history should be far right or far left. It just says like that 2 users who have the same history, and then one of them is suddenly watching more. Yeah.
So
But just one point is like basically because of the previous result that we would see that like, okay, the consumption is very much unimodal. We can guess that like perhaps the history is, you know, heavily toward the same.
Same congruent ideology. Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
can you repeat the last part when you say in the matching process you were looking for? I was convinced you were also controlling for the political leaning of the
Okay,
user.
we just control over like the consumption. Consumption is all we have. We control over demographic as well, but we don't know if actually the user.
But how do
answering
you
the survey.
operationalize consumption in terms of the
Consumption
same news
meaning-
outlet, in terms of?
Yeah, the same grouping, right? In our grouping, we have like you are watching 10 minutes from far right, 10 minutes from center, right?
So, okay, the control and treatment group are somehow aligned for what pertains to their views,
Mhm.
because they watch the same stuff and they read the same stuff, probably,
Yes.
right? So the matching takes into account the political leaning in
In the sense of like what you
implicitly.
are watching.
Yeah.
Yes,
So you're comparing apple to apple. You're not comparing apple to orange.
yes.
My question is, did you also control for the activity level or of these users? Because in the treatment is, okay, user is exposed to 4 videos rather than 1, right?
Yes. But it's like 4 back-to-back. So it's like up to this point, it's similar. So here, this user has watched 1, and then we find some users that like at some point, they have watched 4 back-to-back. And then.
So the history before is exactly the same.
Yes.
You don't have a pattern of one group watching more movies in
Yeah.
the pre-exposure phase. The
So we
pre-exposure
only
phase.
control over news consumption, right? We just say
Oh,
like you have
okay.
the same news consumption diet from far left to far right.
Mhm.
On the web and also on YouTube. So on the web is like we had annotation of again like source level,
Mhm.
and then we just again group them, and then we have demographic. These are the things that we control over. At the end of the day, this user, we don't know intentionally watch these 4 videos or like autoplay actually showed them these videos. So that's the point that makes everything here that we see, it's not causal. It's basically like just one sort of prediction. People who are watching 4 have watched more in future, no causal conclusion. Okay. And then it comes as, okay, it seems like that we looked at the data, a really big data set, there's a small group highly engaged and they are more and more engaged over the time. Is YouTube radicalizing people? What do you think, like who are in favor of YouTube radicalizing by this evidence? Good.
It's very convincing.
So you are not convinced that YouTube is radicalizing people? They're watching more and more. No?
Not yet.
Okay. So let's just continue, see if we can convince you. Okay. So let's see how people find this content. Okay, they are there, they are watching it, but how they are finding this content. So we look at 2 different scales over their lifetime and over the course of a session. So over the lifetime, we can actually examine this hypothesis that like, you know what, maybe they actually go watch like, you know, like one specific type, and then from there they find more extreme content. And there's a gateway as like everybody's trying to find these pathways toward the far right. So we say that like, let's just look at the transition of these users. This month they are in the center community, and then next month they move to far right community. So, and then we can say, okay, center is a gateway which help people to find far right content. So this is the transition histories of users across these communities per month. So what we see is that this is a hypothesis that anti-woke is actually pushing people to far right. So people go to the anti-woke, and then there's, you know, like a small probability that they actually is kind of like non-zero, and then you can see that people from here go to far right. But when we look at the other side, we see that people are moving from far right to anti-woke. So they have been watching far right, and now they decide that, okay, let's just next month, I will just get more of my consumption pattern from, or like more of my news from anti-woke. And
This is over a year?
So transition, we have looked at the transition per month, like this month you're here, next month where are you? And then overall is over 4-year period of data. Yeah. And then what we see is that basically the main pattern here is that people tend to stay in their community. So over months, the majority of people just stay watching the same content as before. So given the fact that like people are just moving from here, you know, like from center to right, and then from right to right, and then there's the other pattern, I think it's hard to conclude that like, yeah, the pathway is just from moderate to extreme.
This is saying that like the user tend to stay to watch whatever content that they join with, or would I also say that like the recommendation algorithm just only feeds them consistent?
Yeah, this can be concluded as yes, there's these echo chambers. You are watching forever and ever again, mainly from the same community of content.
Could it be the case that there isn't a lot of far right, or well, right-leaning content? So there's more content from the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think of it like jumping into a well of sorts, which doesn't have water and which has water. So it'll probably hit rock bottom fast enough if there's no water. So could it be a case of there not being enough mainstream right-leaning content for people to jump from, say, somewhere a center to a far right?
Or is it because we see like everybody is shifting toward left? Is that why you're?
No.
But generally, they tend to stay in their own community.
Oh, yeah.
Even though like this one, which is a small.
Okay.
You see that like majority of your time is within the same community.
No, maybe my question was based off of a past paper that I've read, which said, oh, the right-leaning people tend to get radicalized faster. But I don't know if you observe that, and if you do,
I think that those results that are showing that like for a user when they are watching more, they watch more and more.
or yeah,
meaning like they get more engaged over the time.
Right.
That's kind of like answer to that question.
Right.
The evidence from this study is like, yeah, people from far right are watching more and more over time from the same content.
So,
can your data tell that the user is also rewatching the same videos?
Yes. Yeah. So I don't think again that matters right? So we did a lot of data cleaning as like if it's back to back, like people just pause and then come back again. For those, we just aggregate. But overall, if it's once this month and once 2 months from now, we just say that again, it's another viewership from the same content.
By the way, you pointed out something that I was observing, which is the left column.
Yeah,
Looks
majority
like-
of people are actually, like, if there is a transition, that's mainly toward the left. I don't have an answer as like, maybe it's because the production is more, and then, as you said, like if recommendation is, like trying to just, if the behavior of the recommendation is based on the supply, as there's more content, maybe there are more people. But I cannot answer from this data why this is happening.
Could it be also censorship?
I
That far right videos getting more censored more than far left? Or like,
think we should compare left with right.
yeah, left and right.
Yeah, maybe they demote the right. Again, we don't have enough evidence to answer that. Yeah, I think that's the best thing to say.
Is it during pre-Trump, right? I guess.
Yes, yeah. And then everything depends on, like maybe if it's right today, maybe they changed the algorithm, so everything is just limited.
This was during Trump, no?
Yeah, Trump's first term.
Trump's first term, 2016 to 2020.
Yeah, it's 2016 to 2019.
Oh, so during Trump.
I mean, like,
Oh,
yeah,
before this, okay.
Trump one,
Yeah.
not some two.
So yeah, I like these are the things that need to be studied more. And then right now, again, like we are trying to say, we annotate everything. So we take like we actually are taking like the whole 2024 data, and then we annotate everything, not just source level. And then we look at the video and say, is it talking about immigration or not? Is it talking about election or not? And that's basically the full picture. And then we collect everything that all of these videos have produced. Then actually I can talk about, hey, this is what has been produced, and then this is what people are consuming. So that's a, like a better study to answer your question. Okay, so here, some evidence, echo chambers, people say there, we want to see like whose fault is that again?
And this is for user, like community, basically, not minutes watched. Like the majority.
It's a community level,
Yeah.
meaning that like that this month I get majority of my content from center, and then let's look at the next month and then see if I'm still in the center. Then we'll just add one here. If I'm going toward, like left, then we will just add one number to that group. Okay, so this is over the lifetime. This is what is happening for these users over the lifetime. And then now let's just look at some other, like, let's see what we can get.
Sorry.
Can we keep some questions towards the end? Otherwise, we'll never. Sorry, David, but it's great. I love it.
It's okay. Then, yeah, it's okay. The second part would be fast.
We can go also further. We have the room until 12:30.
Okay.
So
Do you want to ask your question?
Oh yeah, just like for the heat map before, is you saying that it just count like the majority of the content coming from this group of content, and it will shift the next month.
Yes, meaning like that this month you spend 80% of your time watching center, then we put you in the center community. Next month you watch 51% of your content from left, then we would call you as left.
But it could also be the case that it decreases, right, from 80 to 51. But it's still the most dominant.
Yes. Maybe like you had 90% from one group. It is basically the majority, is not 50.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's majority, yes. So, okay, what is the other possible causes for radicalization? So here we just say, okay, we have a few hypotheses. Basically for the first hypothesis, we want to see that like if a user is watching more and more over the course of, let me see like which this one is. Okay, yes. So this hypothesis here, the first hypothesis comes from that like, again, some of the narratives out there that like, you know what, as you stay more and more toward, like the end of the session, let's say that you spend like 1 hour on YouTube, as you stay more, you start seeing crazy content. So this has been some hypothesis that was circulating that like, as the sessions prolong, then you will see more low quality content. And then we can look at the session and then see for sessions who are longer, actually we see more and more crazy content toward the end. And then it comes the second hypothesis, how people find content within the course of a session. So like, as you mentioned, maybe I'm watching, like Reddit, or I'm reading Reddit, New York Times, something, and then I see a video, I click, and then I jump into YouTube. In that case, we would say, but what is the fault of recommendation algorithm? Maybe it's the fault of platform, we don't know. But anyway, that's another way that you can find a video from Twitter. And then the third one is like that, okay, if actually your consumption pattern on YouTube and outside YouTube is the same, what can we say about you in that sense? Because then it would be, you behave the same everywhere. Okay, so for the first one, we want to say, if we just take all the sessions and then we just align all the sessions and then we say, you know what, always toward the end of the session, we will see more and more consumption of far-right content. We can just simply look at the distribution and say, yeah, it's very easy. It's just observational. And then we see that you are getting more content. So we look at the distribution for all different classes from far left. Yeah, I don't think we have far left. Yeah. So from far left to far right, simply we just look at the distribution of like how much content toward like the relatively at the early phase of the session or toward the end, which basically we see kind of uniform distribution. So what it says is like that we don't have such a pattern, that we see that the majority of far right had been consumed toward the end of the session. So it's like these narrative that has been out there that like, yeah, YouTube will run out of high quality content. We don't see within our data such a pattern. The second hypothesis is that how people find content on YouTube. And I would say that for these three analyses, for us, what is make it meaningful is that we compare more extreme content with center and left and right. So it's just the behavior is the same across all these categories. It's not that there is a systematic difference for far right group. This is basically what we want to get at. So what here to say how people find content on YouTube within a session, we say maybe you watch one video after another. That can be a proxy for recommendation algorithm. You may visit a channel, you just go to Fox News and then you click on a video. In that case, we say that you find the content through the channel. It can be through your homepage, you are in homepage, and then we see you click on a video. It can be searched. So because we exactly see what are the search query, we can see that you just go there and search for artist flat, and then you see a video after that. And then it can be an external page. For external page, again, it would be you are watching Reddit, you are watching Twitter, and then you are watching a video after that. And then what we find is that in terms of like one video after another video for far right is 36% of the video have been viewed with that pattern, which is the same fraction, like approximately about the same range for center, left, right, and the other categories. So if this number was 36 for far right and it was 10 for more moderate group of news, then we would say that it seems like people find far right more toward like proxy for recommendation algorithm. And then similarly here, we would call this as a proxy for how much we find the content through recommendation algorithm. This one is a proxy that like is more of like what you are looking for. And then we find that 6% is coming through search, again, kind of the same range approximately for all these group of category of news. In the partisan spectrum, we see that it's kind of the same, and then majority of the content is coming after an external page. So here for us, this is more of, like what user is looking for compared to here, which is maybe this one better proxy for recommendation algorithm. Again, there's no systematic difference across these different categories. Like people find them with relatively the same referral mode, fraction of referral mode. And then the last one, our hypothesis is that, okay, what does it tell us if actually I can look at your news diet outside YouTube? Let's say that on YouTube, I find these two viewership, like user A is just watching these videos, user B is watching these videos. So if I look at their news consumption outside YouTube, and then if I see that this user is actually watching a lot of, like left or center, like a very different content outside the platform, If the majority of my users are acting like this, then I would say, okay, maybe it's platform, because when I'm inside this platform, all I am seeing is a different type of content compared to this is what I am getting outside on the web. If it's more like this, that's like whenever I go to Twitter, I go to Reddit, or I go to like on the web and then look at these news publishers, I see the same taste, then I would say that maybe it's more user preference, what I am observing inside YouTube. And then we just take a random sample of YouTube news users and then compare them with news users from the communities, each of the communities that we find. So what we observe is that like for a far right member, it's 3 times more likely to watch web news, which is coming from far right. So, or what we find is that for anti-woke, we didn't know like who are the audience of anti-woke, but we are seeing the audience for this group is actually twice more likely to get far right on the web. So what it's saying is that basically people have the same taste inside or outside YouTube, which shows that is aligned with their preferences. So going through like these 3 results, to conclude, we see that like, okay, people are watching far right, there's a small group, no systematic difference across these different groups, but none of them is still saying that like that who is at fault. It's just saying that there's a lot of signals for user preference. There's a lot of signals for supply and demand of the content. YouTube is just a library of content. There's something there, people just go and find those content. And some of them are pointing out that like that, it's most likely to be from user preference, but here's what we are stuck. We don't know how to actually disentangle these 2 from each other. If we actually think that to some extent it's user, to some extent it's algorithm, the question would be that like, how do you want to make it meaningful as like who is at fault? Should we go and correct people or should we go and change algorithm? But if you want to answer this question, we are bounded again with what we are observing. So the problem was like from what we are observing, we cannot actually say that to what extent who is contributing. So if you want to answer this question, that is it the fault of recommendation algorithm? This is your observational data, right? You have a mix of algorithm and user agency. What you need is a word with all those billions of videos where there's no recommendation algorithm. And then you just have your users and say, okay, go watch some videos, and then I collect the same data, and then I compare this trajectory with this trajectory, if there's no recommendation algorithm. So basically, you need a counterfactual word that there is no recommendation algorithm to interfere. So you can say, okay, this is how I can say this is the fault of recommendation algorithm, which is, we cannot have that, right? Let's just imagine with this abundance of data and or like, this is just as a research study, we cannot create such a space that there is no recommendation algorithm for the user. So again, to separate these 2 from each other, there can be another approach. What if I just remove this part, the brain of the user, and then I create a word which is just recommendation algorithm. So if I just remove your taste and interest in anything, then actually I have again this word and this word, which I can estimate your agency into getting the content that you have viewed. And it doesn't seem impossible. Basically, what we are saying is like, I'm observing this user. I want to create all these counterfactual words as like, what if you would behave differently? What if you behave like A, B, C, and then go on? Then I could create all these different versions of you and say, if you didn't choose those, if you didn't watch those 4 far right videos, what would be your trajectory? And then this is what we are getting at. And simply what we call this as the other counterfactual word that we are hoping if we can create them, then we can actually measure like what is happening causally here. So here's what we do. We say, I have a real user. I know that this user has watched all of these over 6 months to 2 years. And then that would, we call it as a counterfactual, as a control bot. So that would be our control. And then for the treatment, we just create all the copy of the same user. We just create an account, we just assign the same demographic, and then we watch the same videos for a duration of 60 videos. And then we try to mimic like every action as like, you watch this one for 2 minutes, the other one for 10 minutes. So these variations will create the same taste as the real user has. So for the first 60 video, we just create multiple copy of the same user, meaning they are all acting the same. And then here we can actually test two hypotheses. It's like that we want to estimate the bias of the recommendation algorithm, and we can also estimate the forgetting time. And these two actually are complementary to what we observed. As like we observe people stay in the same community, we observe people are watching more, and then now we want to see if we change the taste or agency of the user, how these results will change. So basically here in this learning phase, we just create a personalized version as the same user, and in the observation phase, we just say, okay, now let's just apply some treatment, and then for every single video after watching, we just collect the recommended item, like the list of 30 recommended item homepage and recommendation from the sidebar. So here we try in the treatment, what we do, we mimic 3 different behavior of the user. Here we say that, okay, you watched this because you liked it, it was available for you. Here we say that, okay, at the treatment point, if you are keep choosing from one specific, let's say like far right content from one specific group, what we are saying is like that, forget about your preference, forget about what you like, just randomly select something from sidebar because to you, they are all similarly interesting. So then we call this as like, now I'm removing your agency because I am saying just pick something randomly. So we say pick something randomly or choose the up next or pick something randomly from your homepage. In that case, it would say, if you stop sending the signal, what would be your experience on YouTube? So here we created about 1,200 trajectories. We had about like 100 far-right users. We test this mainly just for far-right user. We want to see for this specific group, how much is the contribution of their agency and interest. And I think the main difference from compared to the previous studies has been like that these are personalized with the same user. We have a control to compare with, and then this is how it will look like. So for a center user, you can imagine that like up to here, all the trajectories from control and treatment are the same, right? Because we are personalizing and telling them watch the same thing. And then from here, they just go from follow one of the paths, like up next, random sidebar, random homepage. And then we see that like kind of is the same fluctuation around the center. So here in this second study, we have a larger set of like a few thousand channels, which they have a partisan bias score. And then 0 is about the center, and then toward like as is bigger is more toward the far right. And then here we have examples for 3 users from far right, which on this side, like as you go toward the right, they are consuming more and more of content from far right. And just one last thing. So then you can see as you're going toward the right, there is a bigger gap. So this is the trajectory of the same user. This is what the user actually did. If this user would not select based on their preference, meaning just selecting something randomly, you would see that like, yeah, they are actually more pushed back toward the center.
I didn't get what's the difference between, the first one is the control, right?
This one is a control. This is what we observe. Oh, this one is center.
Center,
yeah,
like.
This is a user. Here, the majority of the consumption is coming from center.
Okay, and the others are.
The others are like,
right.
you see that they are watching more. As like, as this number is bigger, means that your taste is more toward right and far right. And then this is the partisan score. So the partisan score is like minus, negative is left and positive is right. And as this number is bigger, it's more toward the far right.
I'm trying to understand what's the difference between low, medium, and
okay,
high.
The difference here is like that they have like less of extreme content. The majority of their consumption is still coming from videos which are far right, but they have like fewer. The point that this one is trying to make is like that as they are more and heavier far right consumer, we can see this gap is more pronounced. It's easier to visually see that. And then these are just 4 trajectory examples. And then when we just look at these, aggregated values, and then we can just see this is the distribution of the numbers, partisan scores, for the control group, and then these are the 3 treatment groups. And then here is what you can see. When we say just select something randomly, select something and just listen to the recommendation algorithm, don't go and look around for the content that you like, then we see more shift in trajectory toward moderate content. It's not that we say that the algorithm is pushing people for the center. It basically depends on the supply and algorithm. So maybe at the time, there's all the majority of the content, if it's belong to moderate, more moderate content, algorithm will just push you toward like what is out there. And then this is what you will get. So what is basically saying is that when we are observing that this user is watching a lot of this, if the user would say, okay, I don't care, I just select something randomly and watch, then you would say that they would have a different experience, which is more toward moderate content. Any question?
Sorry, just a clarification. When you say randomly, you mean from the whole catalog?
Sorry?
From the whole catalog, you mean randomly?
So randomly is like you have a sidebar on the YouTube, right? So when you're on YouTube page and you're watching a video, there's a sidebar recommendation. And then we just take the top 30 video on the sidebar, and then we just randomly pick one.
Okay, but the sidebar are conditioned anyway, like by the user interest.
Because for the first 60 video,
yes,
yeah, we just have personalized it, right? For the 60 video, we just learn the taste of the user.
So it's randomly, but still.
Yeah, the point is that even when it's personalized, even if you just for a long time are watching something, you start watching randomly, what you will see is that, yeah, again, you will be back toward what is out there, majority of content or moderate content, yes. So that's how we call it as like, perhaps like what has been happening, this gap is what is comes from your self-selection of the content that you like.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, just to build off of that, you're dealing with bots, right? So if you were to randomly recreate these accounts, so delete the account, create a fresh account for each bot every time that it has to pick, would that be more of a random scenario? Because there is no recommendation, it deletes it. It basically gives you a starting page with nothing in it.
If you don't create a history?
Yeah, like, so you watch one video, delete the account, recreate a new account, and see what video this bot will.
I think that would be basically auditing through API.
Right.
That would be just simply going to API and search for something with no history, with no user. So you want to exactly mimic the like, this is you, and then you're just living your life for 60 video watching YouTube, and then suddenly you want to see, even like in a personalized scenario, that algorithm has picked up your taste. We want to see what will happen if we just take out your taste and preferences. And then we see that.
Oh, because of the recommendation.
Yeah.
Would this result be sensitive to the number of videos personalized before the treatment, you think?
We tried from 30 to 60, and then basically for 30, we had the same result. Yeah, but we just said, let's just go with the longest. I think way before 60, it's personalized.
Gotcha.
And then now we can actually look at the same result, and then we see that this measure is the user preference. And then we see as the user is watching more and more, like at the treatment level, if the user has been exposed to more and more, we see that this difference in the taste is actually a bigger number. So when we were actually for the first part of the study, we will see that if a user is exposed or has watched 4 back-to-back far-right video, in future they are consuming more. With this study, what we are measuring is that this gap as user preference is growing as well. So kind of like giving more separation for that analysis is telling us that is most likely contributed from user preference or user selection. And now I was curious to see, okay, how can I like simulate something for this result and see this one, which is mimicking the echo chamber behavior, to what extent we can say that is actually, again, by user selection compared to the algorithm is creating this pattern. So for this experiment, we tested, we created a scenario like this. I had this user, and this user has been watching for about like 200 videos. This user has a majority of the consumption from far right. And this is what I have observed, right? And then from this user, I could get that transition history. So here I create this scenario as like for the first 60 video, I will have exactly like a treatment bot, which will exactly watch the same as this one. From here, I will replace it with a center user. So I just get the trajectory of a center user, and then I will just from here say, you know what, you changed your mind. Now you say that I want to be a normal user who is more interested in the center. And then you will just follow this trajectory. And what we look at here, we look at the partisan score of recommended item. And then what would tell us, it will tell us as if you change your case, what we see is that the recommendation algorithm gradually show you more and more center and follow your case at any time. So it wouldn't be that it would not forget forever if you have been consumer of far right and keeping you in your echo chamber. And then what we see is like something about before 30 video is when the recommendation will forget. So up to here, even though you have been watching like 10 videos from center, there's a lot of far right videos here. And as you get more and more, like, like watch more and more of center, we will see that the recommendation algorithm will kind of like shift toward the center content.
And is this related only to videos or also external web?
No, just the videos. Yeah, here is just the videos. So basically, if we are seeing this pattern, if one user would change their interest, they would receive the item from the new, like new site that they have. And I can say the other studies after this one, which try to get the same answer. If I could disentangle these two from each other, it was from David Lazar lab. They get the user trajectories, and then for Google search. And then what they had was basically they could actually collect the recommended item. So here's a user search for something, they have a list of recommendations, they select something. And then when they actually look at the user selection, they found that mostly looking at the score of like the average score of like what is recommended to you, and then what you are selecting has a higher partisan score, which is another approach to answer the same question. And the conclusion was that there is a huge contribution which is coming from user selection, because there has been a lot of center content there that they didn't choose, even though like at any location in their recommendation algorithm. So this is just a general framework to see that like how like you can start from big data and then study like anecdote to see how they scale, if they're systematic, like pushing toward one side. And then we want to show how we basically merging it with more of like experiment design. You can see if you can answer this. And the problem is that you cannot bring people to the lab and ask them, watch this, watch that, change your case. So this is basically some sort of like trick to see how we can get into more causal studies for the topic of studies which is sensitive or like toward radicalizing your participant. I think it's better to skip the other parts, but basically we are trying the same framework as like, what about the teenagers if they are watching a lot of like content which make them sad, and then if we collect their mood, and then after that we see if there was some sort of intervention which would deviate them from watching uncomfortable content. Or like for cancer treatment is the same. We observe there are a lot of users who are exposed to more of alternative medicine, and then we want to see basically if we can apply an intervention to shift them from push them, getting a lot of answers to instead of the medically approved treatments. So as I said, it's just a point that like, yeah, this is more of a framework rather than just thinking into one specific platform. I'm gonna quickly go over this. So later, as we all start to get excited about LLM, we learned that now LLM are being used as a re-ranking tool to better understand the context and start personalizing more and pushing more as like for personalization. So we actually get all these recommended items that we collected from the previous study, and then we started trying more, like re-ranking based on different rules. So first we said just, okay, re-rank the items based on user history. And what we found is that there's a push for these far-right users. LLM quickly learned about their interest, and then just simply saying re-rank based on user interest without saying anything as any regularization or any guidance as like what this user what should be the rule for your ranking, we see that like if there's a push, this is the average score from rank 1 to about 20 as like exactly what YouTube is recommending to users. And then this is the rank, the partisan score for this ranking, when we just simply ask LLM to re-rank for better match with the user interest. So here, what we are saying is that just blindly trying more and more personalization will cause more and more harm. Or simply we can use this LLM instruction-based approach prompting to use them as a safeguard. So in the next study, what we said is basically re-rank the item, but push back like the conspiracy and extreme content and try to keep the diversity. And we see that it's just a matter of the design. If you want to push for personalization, but apply safeguards, LLMs are very strong in that sense. And with that, yeah, it's the effort of the whole team, and thanks to you for listening and my collaborator to make this research happen. Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead, it's fine. I've asked a lot, so I'll let you go.
Okay. So if it's not the recommendation, what do you think is the reason people keep choosing the like top 10% partisan recommendations?
I don't say it's not recommendation. I say like there's a big preference component, which is not a study, right? So that's the point. It's like there's a lot of attention to fix the recommendation algorithm. What we are saying is like that's not the whole story. It's a combination of like how users are actually interacting with the platform. So definitely there is a really big preference or agency that is contributing to what we are observing. And the other part is again supply and demand is like that. Let's say everybody, all the content they're provided is right or is left. Then when we observe a huge viewership from left, you just cannot say is the recommendation algorithm, like whatever reason producers like to produce that content. So I think it's still at the point of is paying more attention to all contributing factor rather than just because it's happening on the platform, it's the platform fault.
We were talking before earlier, like comments, and I'm thinking actually this might be explained though by, like you were saying, that you have to take into account the feedback loop, right? Yes. The dynamics, right? So even if what you're measuring, you're measuring just one step process, and it's a small effect. But like because of the feedback loop,
yes,
the small effect will amplify.
In terms of like user interest, you're saying,
or just yeah, the kind of content the user ends up being exposed to, like over eventually.
So that's the point. Is like that. This was happening, and then here I had a prop and watched the behavior. Maybe like 5 years ago, like it was like the recommended items and everything was very different. But after having a long feedback loop, now I'm saying it's your taste. The point is maybe 5 years ago it was not your taste, right?
Oh, the system already learned from the long the
system has learned, and like you have also shift your preference. I think that's the problem with feedback loop. Let's say there are a lot of these meta studies. They get the recommended item, they reverse it and show you less and less extreme content, and then like for a week. And then after a week, they come to you and say, hey, are you less polarized? You say, well, no, I still like the same stuff. But the point is like for 5 years, 10 years, for a long time, you had the same taste, or like your taste has actually shaped. And now within 1 week, if I just show you the content from the other side.
And my taste had affected the videos that I've watched, and YouTube knows about that, right? So it
yes,
about my taste.
Yeah, everything has shifted like because of the feedback loop. But I think what we are saying is that even though for a long time recommendation algorithm has learned your taste, within like 30 videos, it will learn your new taste. That's what this result, the forgetting time is saying. Is that yes, for 30 videos, the algorithm will stay connected. And when you look at homepage and sidebar, for homepage, you see that it's less forgiving. and it will just continue for a longer time because like sidebar is more immediate, homepage is like your long-term taste. So for homepage, you can see it will continue for a longer period to keep you watching or like recommending you the same content. But even if it's the preference, maybe it's just like someone's preference like 5 years ago was not that, and then over the time it has shifted. I think the way that these platform owners are talking about it is like that. Okay, I'm recommending 20 items and maybe like 5 are extreme and toward your taste, but I have 25, which is center, moderate, or like, you know, factual content. You always go and pick those 5. So it's not my fault, you know, because you have option, and I don't know the answer to that. Maybe it's their fault, I think, I don't know. But these are just showing that like not everything in the recommended item. If you want to change your taste, there is.
Do you have any contacts at YouTube to find out how the recommenders actually work?
There are some papers, they have blogs, and for example, they were saying, if you watch a video less than 30 seconds, then we just will not count that as like viewership, which many of the computer science auditing studies, to make it faster, they would have watched a video for like 30 seconds, like 20 seconds to just pass through. Like for example, the whole experiment length was like 2 hours. For us, it was about 2-3 weeks. But they were saying like that there's a minimum, and there's another thing is the variation. If you watch something 2 minutes and another thing 2 hours, this variation will tell the recommendation algorithm what do you like. So then that's the other reason that we decided to go exactly with the variations for the same user. Yeah.
Kind of add on that, like, yeah, there's also like viewership is just one way. I'm thinking like
Yes.
showing, signaling interest. You can also like.
We tried subscribing as well. So what we did was like we take the users and then we see what they have been watching more, and then based on that, it's okay. This user has been watching a lot of content from this specific channel. So at the start of the study, we subscribe to 3 channels which have been most viewed. But basically, like after a while in the treatment, it will follow back, to the same result without subscription. But the other complication is logging in. If you notice, whenever you want to log in, it will ask for dual authentication. So the part that I actually skipped over, like the whole engineering is like, how do you bypass like these dual authentications and everything, make it look real so it's not actually blocked. But yeah, you need to log in to be able to like, search, and follow or subscribe, all of these.
I have one question related to probably the previous slide, the LLM recommendation stuff. Can you expand a bit on that?
So yes, so here what we say is that, first of all, when we look at the distribution of content in the recommended items, we could see that the distribution is like, is all over the place. It's a distribution for far right. So for users who had far right taste, when we collected their recommended items, what we could see is that far right is not always at top. It's just distributed uniformly during the whole, like for rank 1 to rank 10. So this is what this one is saying. So this is the top, and then this is toward the bottom of the recommendation, right? And then here is just the average score of like videos for I think it's about like a few thousand recommended trajectory. And then you see that for YouTube, this is the average score. So this user historically was watching content with this partisan score, and then recommended items have this partisan score. And then rank 1, it's a little higher, but this is basically for rank 1, this is the average of partisan score for rank 2 to And then this one is LLM helping to re-rank those 20 recommended items. And then we simply have a base prompt, which says like, just re-rank so it's closer to what user like. Based
on the chronological viewing history?
Based on what user has watched.
Yeah. Yes. So you provide the LLM with, I don't know, the description, the transcript of the videos? We
provided 10 videos with the title and description and transcript, yes. And then we said these 10 videos with the exact order is like that. What is at the end is the newest item. what is here is the like number 10. And then based on these history that you have, just re-rank these 20 items, and then it will just shuffle and give you a new rank. Then simply we just look at like across like all the sessions and trajectories, we just look at the average, and we see there's a push as bringing more far right at the top compared to YouTube.
Okay.
And then we have the other variations, and then we say, now let's just imagine like red teaming and safeguarding. You find the leak, and then you just assign more prompting, say, okay, if somebody asks you, I want to commit suicide, just simply don't answer. So here we try the same thing, like we provided all the safeguards. It's like, don't do this, don't do that. If somebody was watching a lot of far right, you know, like if there was conspiracy, demote those content, and then we could push back, make this flat again. So this ranking that has more far right, we could just flatten it. But we also added this criteria that like push back like problematic content, but based on the topic, keep the topic similarity. So we could see that like in terms of like performance, we have the same AUC, but we could push back like more conspiracy toward the end.
How do we objectively say something is problematic or not?
Oh yeah, that's the philosophical. I'm not social scientist. I just refer to my political scientists, or like even for the other study like cancer, misinformation, or like teenager harm. My first question is like, what is harmful for a teenager? Just watching somebody beautiful, I don't know, like reach me doesn't make me feel bad, but maybe for a teenager, having friends with a specific lifestyle makes them really depressed. So it depends on the context for so many things. For okay, old days, people would just watch the content, annotate. Today, you just ask LLM and say, what do you think of about like a partisan score for this content? But we tried some interpretability. Why would you say this is far right? And then we find 8 markers. These markers are, it's because they attack the other party. It's because they reinforce their own ideology. And then we define these 8 markers. And then we just had 0, 1, 0, 1. This news piece has these elements as like feature engineering. Then we use these 8 features, and then we predicted the estimated score on a hell set. And then we could see that like there's just 5% drop in the performance compared to directly ask the model. And then we tested it with human annotation. We could see just replace the whole thing as prompting and replace it with these 8 features. Then we say, okay, maybe we can conclude that these features are actually predictive of the party.
These features are in the paper, right?
No, it's a whole different paper under review. Yes. But yeah, I think that getting the markers help to better understand, giving it some interpretability, how LLM is deciding to assign a score.
Okay, we are at time. About half an hour past, but it's okay. Please give me a loud applause for our very dedicated speaker for a fascinating presentation, and we're going to join her at lunch.